So I love to start these conversations off by having each one of you just give a little background to who you are and how you became involved with this project. Do you want to go ahead and start, John?
Sure. Hi, my name is John Russell. I am this. Let's see, how do I begin? I did The Seagull and our earlier version of this, Sense and Sensibility, the iteration we did in late 2014 at the Sheen Center. I got involved with Bedlam through my girlfriend, Samantha, who was an understudy of St. Joan, which was one of the first shows that Bedlam did in rotating repertory with Hamlet. Samantha and I were in a production of a play called The Arsonists a couple of years ago, and the artistic director of Bedlam came to see that. And but really the way it all began was kind of a very personal friendship. I had become friends with these guys, and we'd spent a lot of time together, and one thing sort of led to another, and it blossomed into a professional relationship, and very, very grateful for that as well.
Thanks, John.
Yeah.
Laura?
Hi. I met the artistic director of Bedlam, Eric Tucker, in Prague, where we were both working on a show. It was where I am from. I'm from Prague. And I ended up moving to New York and meeting all these wonderful people and joining the company. And I, too, was in, as were we all, in this production's original run, which was in repertory with The Seagull.
Great. I think you guys can add a little more background about who Bedlam is and how that began.
Want to go first, or you go first?
So I became involved with Sense and Sensibility because I wrote the adaptation in conjunction with Jane Austen, and I came up with the idea to adapt Sense and Sensibility on a road trip with Andrus, who had just started Bedlam. So that's how I got involved with Bedlam, and I'm also in the production, so I was also in the rep pair of The Seagull and Sense and Sensibility. I played the sensibility, and Andrus plays the sense, and that is how I got involved with Bedlam. Yeah.
Anything to add?
Sure. I'm Andrus Nichols, and I'm the producing director and a co-founder of Bedlam. Kate and I, on this road trip, had this idea. We're chatting about different roles that we'd like to play in life in general, and this story came up, and Kate boldly declared that she would write it, although
Quite
she
stupidly
at that point really never written a play.
No.
And at that moment, we pulled up to a traffic light, and Marianne's Diner was on the corner, so we figured that was a good sign.
Yes.
And so I've been involved with Kate in terms of the process of reading all of the various drafts since the beginning, which we'll probably get more into later. Yeah, and we knew that we were interested in it, and we had this company, and it seemed like it was going to be a good fit. We actually originally, Eric Tucker couldn't join us tonight, who is my partner in crime and co-founder in the company, had originally wanted to pair it with The Crucible, which we couldn't get rights to because this Broadway production that's running now was already in the planning stages. And then it ended up getting paired with The Seagull instead when we couldn't get rights to Crucible. Yeah, I don't...
Great.
Is that okay?
Yeah, that's some good background just for all of us to get started. Another thing I really like asking, this is sort of selfish because I work in a bookstore, but I'm curious what books have influenced you as artists, whether that's related to this production specifically or just in general. Feel free, whoever wants to start that one off. I'll give you a second to think. It's a tough one.
I know what your answer is, Kate.
Do you?
I mean, it's obvious.
I was slightly influenced by Jane Austen's Sense and Sensibility.
Okay. I see.
In the development of this work. No, I did a fair amount of research, actually. I read Jane Austen's letters, which are quite wicked and funny, and a lot of books on sort of women in the time, especially in terms of what books have influenced me as a person. The answer is probably a lot of them. I was very, very influenced by The Feminine Mystique, which I read when I was like 12 and started me on my current militant feminist lifestyle agenda. But I did a fair bit of research for this adaptation.
Okay. Do you guys have other things that have inspired you as an artist or building your characters for this production specifically?
Do you read?
Yes. I mean, I would say that my development as an artist is, as far as literature goes, I think are more related to plays than
That
novels.
makes a lot of sense. Sure.
So I could list off. I mean, I could rattle off several of them, which have been influential and seminal to me as a human being and as an artist. But I'm trying to think of books that are related to this, to our production in this genre. I really loved reading Wuthering Heights in 10th grade.
Last year.
But these days, I'd say I read just purely for escapist pleasure. I'm currently on the 4th installment of the Millennium Trilogy right now.
Excellent.
Thoroughly enjoying it.
Great.
I'm kind of partial to the Russians, like Tolstoy and stuff. I have not read War and Peace yet, but it's just such a big book to carry around, like on the subway. But I hate reading off of like an iPad, so it's a dilemma. So that was also why I was really tickled when we did The Seagull, because Chekhov is one of my favorites, and I love the way those books describe a society and the nature of a people, really, what the Russian culture and their passions and are like. And I actually thought that was one of the interesting things about our pairing of The Seagull and Sense, is that Jane Austen's characters also obviously live in their own very particular time with very particular manners and etiquette, as do the Russians, although ours was a modern adaptation, a contemporary adaptation. It still, I think, carried a lot of the Russian blood in it. At least I hope it did.
Modern adaptation of The Seagull.
Of The Seagull.
And Euresis, which is great.
Yeah.
I was a literature major, actually. I didn't go to school for theater. So,
Wow.
But lately, I mean, in the last many years, most of what I read I read a lot of plays. But I think some formative novels, I can't tell how many times I've read Virginia Woolf's The Waves. It's one of my all-time favorites. I love Cormac McCarthy. I like a lot of American sort of Gothic.
Great. I bet there's a
novels.
couple people here who would also enjoy any play recommendations, if you want to just throw out a couple real quick.
Oh my gosh.
To read. Plays to read.
To read, yeah.
Plays to
Not
read.
like things happening on Broadway, but
Well, anything by Arthur Miller, O'Neill. O'Neill is probably the biggest influence on me as a playwright. I just find his most book-like to read because the stage directions are so elaborate, which my castmates will tell you I tend to follow in my own scripts, unfortunately.
For the same reason, I think Sarah Rule's plays are really, really incredible read because the stage directions are like little poems in between everything and really gorgeous.
She's terrific. Super. Kate, you've obviously spent a lot of time with the original text of Sense and Sensibility. Can you talk about the process of adapting it for the stage in this totally unique way? What's the process like? How did it
cried
evolve?
a lot.
There was a lot of weeping.
It was weeping and blood.
Yeah, I'd love to hear about different drafts, different iterations, what the first go-round was like, what changed for this one.
I mean, I get asked this question with some regularity. The truth is I don't really have a set process. I once read someone, I forget who it was, one of the big playwrights, said that each play teaches you how to write itself, which I find to be true. But especially Sense and Sensibility, as Andrus said, was really my first full-length play. So I really didn't know what I was doing. I've been an actor for a long, long time, but I had only written short plays up until then. So I started with the novel itself, and I started breaking it down into what would be non-traditional scenelets. I was really interested in, I thought if I was going to do an adaptation, there's no point in doing an adaptation of such a great novel unless you have an idea of what your point of view of it is. And for me, Sense and Sensibility is about how you react to social pressures. Do you follow all the rules, which has its own consequences, as Eleanor finds out, or do you break all the rules, which certainly has its own consequences, which Marianne finds out, and all of the characters find out to some extent, especially, as is still true, women and underprivileged women especially pay for both for following rules and breaking rules, but the men also pay. This is all part of this radical feminist agenda I was talking about before. So I created this device of the gossips because I felt, which Andrus and I had sort of sat around a kitchen table and talked about, because I really wanted to create a sense of how, for modern audiences, how it felt to be judged and talked about all the time, which I think people can relate to, but have some difficulty connecting to it in the same way that people in Jane Austen's day would. So I created this device and then built on that, and then from then on, it was just taking a long, long, long time. I mean, it took me probably a year and a half for the first draft, which is a little deceptive because it's not like I was working on it every day. But then I had a week-long workshop with Bedlam. But then it was just readings and cutting it down, refining it. I found out pretty quickly that at first I was very, very, very faithful to the novel. And even though we had really some of the best classical actors in New York, Jane Austen's sentences really aren't designed to be spoken by human beings. They're just a page long. They're so beautiful to read, but people just lose the thread. So I quickly started writing, and so now I like to call it a collaboration between myself and Jane Austen. It's probably 60% me, 40% Jane Austen.
Sounds right.
But every sentence has been touched or messed around with. And I was talking to Eric about it as I went along, and Eric said to me, you really have to make it your own. So that is how it happened. And then it was just sometimes I liken it to taking a big, huge pile of whipped cream and trying to find structure in the whipped cream, and then eventually being I have to create my own structure within the big pile of whipped cream, which isn't that great of an analogy, actually.
No, it's terrible.
No. The play is better than that particular analogy. But it just took the short answer is it took a long time, and I really had to focus on what I felt Sense and Sensibility is about. And I will say also I have a really stupid sense of humor, so a lot of it was building in the kind of things I find absurd and funny or moving and refining that.
Great.
Well, I just wanted to say something else, which is that if I recall, I mean, one of the difficulties one faces when trying to adapt this kind of novel is that not very much happens, and
They talk a lot.
They sit in parlors and drink tea, and they go on walks, and they write letters.
Yeah.
And in most other adaptations for the stage that you'll read of even Sense and Sensibility or of Pride and Prejudice or some of the other novels, there is a narrator. Which
cheap.
does not help
It's
make
cheap.
anything active at all, and so you just end up with tons of exposition in between these brief little scenes. So there was the arrival at the idea of using the gossips really
Can you
pushed the
describe
thing
that
forward.
for people who haven't seen what the gossips are?
They're like a Greek chorus of high society or low society creatures who judge and talk smack about the main characters throughout the show.
Okay.
And
But it becomes a way to get all of the exposition out into the room without having somebody stand there and tell you who died and who's getting married, and
which is cheap. I don't mean to. Yeah, it's so cheap. The narrator.
Oh, to narrate, yeah. I'm like,
it's
no,
cheap.
I think the gossips are great. Yeah.
No,
What was the process like for you as non-playwrights, but still involved through many iterations, I imagine? From then till now.
I mean, it's been a joy. It's really been a joy, especially coming back to it a second time, doing it in a new space with an improved, tightened script, and to be able to do it with this cast. To me, one of the most pleasurable things about this whole thing is that we're all friends. I mean, we all get along with each other very well off stage, and I think that a certain amount of that shows on stage. And I mean, I can't, of course, see it because it's difficult to sort of gauge that objectively, but it's a real pleasure being able to do this show with people that you really get along with so well. Just generally, it's also just such a rich script. It's I personally have felt that I haven't really had to do. I mean, of course, we all have our process. We all have our ways of sort of getting into a character and figuring out who they are and what their needs and wants are, of course. But at many moments during this show, I find myself thinking, all I need to do is really just kind of say this at face value, and oftentimes the most simple approach is the most effective and the most moving, because it's such a great story. Yeah, that's my feeling on it.
How long was the gap between the first and the second?
Just over a year.
Yeah.
Okay.
About 14 months.
So it was a pretty solid break. It must have been really fun to come back.
Yeah. Yeah, it was like first day of school when we got back. It was very exciting. We all wore our best outfits.
we showered.
And I also just want to say that it's been such a pleasure I was not involved with the original workshops of this show, but even since then, just to watch Kate whittle away at her own work, and I think all good writers are able to edit, and Kate has no fear of just, I mean, how long was it originally? It was a huge script.
Originally, it was quite long.
Yeah.
I mean, not by the time we got to production. By the time that we got to production, it was almost this. I've taken a teeny tiny bit of time off it since then. But the first reading we ever did of it, it was like 70 pages longer. We did not get through it. I was like, skip.
Yeah, but even from one run to the next, and of course it drove us crazy because having to kind of rememorize with just a couple words slightly altered here and there, is maddening, but it's really cool just to watch your perfectionism and how tight and sharp you were able to make it. It's really wonderful.
You gonna write another?
Oh, I've written many since
Many?
then. I mean,
Wow.
I first started writing Sense and Sensibility like 5 or 6 years ago, so I've written many plays since then, including...
manys.
How many plays have I written altogether? Like 10? I've written 3 other adaptations.
Okay.
Vanity Fair, thanks, Andrus. Pride and Prejudice, which... Thanks, Andrus. And Little Women, which I'm like 3/4 of the way through.
Work in progress.
It's a work in progress,
Okay.
yes.
We've sort of alluded to the blocking and how integral it was to the show. I thought it was incredibly creative, almost cinematic, really. Was that always the intention, or did that organically occur? Or is that part of the collaborative process?
Eric Tucker, who directed the piece, after the week-long workshop that we did, where Kate cut an additional 35 pages off the script, and we were trying to figure out how we were going to approach the thing. He knew he was going to put it on wheels. He had done another production of The Libertine by Stephen Jeffries, terrific read.
Great read.
And he'd actually done 2 productions of those, one of which I worked on with him and was in, and another one that he did after that production. And the second one, it was proscenium, but things were on wheels and slid kind of up and down and back and forth in front of you. And he had a lot of fun with it. So he knew he was going to do this on wheels, and then at some point he decided on the alley blocking.
Yeah.
I mean, on the, putting the audience on 2 sides. Here's the challenge. We didn't have any furniture with wheels on it until 2 days before the first preview.
Of the last run.
This was the last run.
I am shocked. I'm shocked.
It was not fun. I mean, we were
my
all scared for
gosh.
our lives. So we would rehearse it like this. We literally we had folding chairs in a room.
Wow.
And we had this idea of how they were all going to work. Of course, we had no idea how competent the casters were going to be on the things we had. And
Let alone how they interacted with our period costumes.
oh yeah, the number of times all the ladies fell out of their chairs because the dresses got stuck under the wheels during tech was comical.
And during performance times.
And during performance for a while. So we actually ended up pushing the opening back of that
Wow.
of that show in the first, because we started in previews and it was like
Dangerous.
it was just
We crashed a lot.
we crashed. We didn't know. You'd roll onto a scene and you'd go to get a chair that had been there in rehearsal in a particular corner, but we didn't realize that we hadn't tracked that actually 2 scenes before, when we changed some other piece of blocking, it had gone off down there. So you were trying to find your chair for dinner and just kind of looking around the room, and oh my God,
Maybe
it was
someone would
really
roll
scary.
it to you.
So this time around, we've improved upon the rolling choreography. I think it's a lot tighter, it's a lot faster, there's a lot more of it. But we had a rehearsal hall that was large enough, and that we could keep things in. So we had all of our rollies for the entire rehearsal process for this run, which was dramatically different and allowed us to actually do things that were a little bit more complicated with the furniture. But the concept was there from the beginning, but it didn't really start developing in any kind of useful way until we were fully up and running with audiences.
That's remarkable.
Also, another quick thing just to tie into what your question was earlier, one of the pleasures of returning to this a second time is that, last time in 2014, we, as Andrew said, we had a matter of a few weeks to really get this up on its feet, and we were focusing almost exclusively on this choreography and on the blocking and where to go and what to do with these wheels on casters. This time, we had much more playtime to really explore characterization and kind of have fun with the meat and potatoes of the text and all of that. And so that was another pleasure of kind of coming back to this with a head start, as it were.
Was the concept, I guess you said Eric wanted it on wheels, but in terms of like the technicalities of this is how it's going to go and you're going to turn her and she's going to fly across the space, was that part of, did everybody come up with those ideas, or was Eric pretty cleanly dictating?
He's very much, he directed the piece. It is absolutely,
He's the captain of the ship.
yes. He is our faithful leader. That said, his process is very collaborative. So he's one of the things that's so wonderful about working with him is that he is. It doesn't matter if you have 2 shows left of a 6-month run. If the better idea comes up, he's willing to try it. So we never set anything, rarely. So it's very collaborative in the room. If somebody says, I have an idea of how to get, from the garden to the cottage faster, or what if we did this with this gossip scene, he's pretty much always willing to try anything, and whatever idea he feels like is the best, the most active, and the most conducive to the storytelling, he will go with, whether it's his own idea or somebody else's, and then he will improve upon it in these ways that you couldn't even imagine when it came out of your mouth. I mean, he's really
But it is really often like collective problem solving in the room. So I'll be like, oh, wait, I've rolled over into this corner, so I can jump out of that corner and, throw this person's wig from, so it's, yeah. So when everyone is able to have a voice, you actually can get a lot more work done more quickly, because everyone knows their own track and can figure out, even just amongst ourselves, what the easiest way is to take care of something. Of course, Eric has veto power over everything, every stupid idea we come up with.
We touched a little bit earlier on, well, Kate, you had mentioned that you incorporated a lot of your sense of humor into the production. I think Jane Austen, we can all agree, is also known for her witticisms, but seeing Sense and Sensibility on stage brings it to life in a totally new way. Can you guys talk a little bit about the role that comedy plays in this production?
I mean, I have a super stupid sense of humor that I certainly crawls into whatever I do. But I will also say, as John said, we're all friends and we're very much an ensemble. It's an ensemble show. And we, in a rehearsal room, I think it's a combination of everyone's sense of humor and everyone trying to make each other laugh. And then that's how we come up with sort of our most outlandish, crazy ideas. And in fact, sometimes it finds its way into the script. Jason O'Connell, who plays Edward, who Eleanor ends up with, and also Robert Ferrers, there's this line where the gossips are talking about Marianne. There are these lines, and they say, too pale, too thin, too pale and thin. And during the last run of the show, he said, she's not that thin. And so now that's in this script officially forever because it's so delightfully bitchy. But I think every single member of the ensemble, and certainly Eric as well, who we've said is just like a genius, we all just contribute our own ridiculous senses of humor, and I think we try really hard to crack each other up, and then we get in previews and see if that works on the audience, and a lot of times it does, because we're doing,
though.
we're really pushing the envelope. I mean, Jane Austen's so funny, and then all of our senses of humor together, we're really just doing crazy stuff. It's really so fun. I mean, I break on stage about once every 3 shows, and we've certainly seen this a million times and been in a million times, but our ensemble is so wacky and creative and fresh that's a lot of the sense of humor.
Some of the characters are closer to caricatures. How did you sort of settle on which would be played in a more straightforward fashion and who would be incredibly outlandish or have wild body characteristics, or how did you sort that out?
She's right there. Sam Steinmetz, who plays Anne Steele, is right there. I think that was also. I honestly think that's also Eric's direction plus. The ensemble, and they're straighter characters in the piece, like John Willoughby, who John plays. Eleanor is certainly very is sort of in some ways the calm center of complete bedlam, if you will.
I see what you did there.
Yeah,
that was good.
Thank you. But I think that's, again, a collaborative process with Eric serving very much as the captain of that ship. And there are certain characters, like Anne Steele is written to be a crazy person, and Sam just pushes that in this wonderful, like, even crazier direction. It's so wonderful. Robert Ferrers is another one of that.
Another thing I noticed was that the level of audience interaction was really high, and there's a lot of breaking of that fourth wall, or I guess second and fourth, really. Was that also Eric? Is he just pushing all of these?
That's part of the aesthetic of the company. We've yet to, the company is very, very much committed to this idea of an immediacy between the actors on stage and the audience, and all of our productions, we often light the audience. I mean, we make it very clear from the top of the show that we're all in the room together, and going to be going on this trip together. Hopefully it doesn't feel like the magician's going to drag you up and cut you in half or anything. We try to not have that kind of audience interaction, which just makes
Not
me
like Blue Man Group.
want to die. Right.
We're not going to throw spaghetti.
We're gonna but yes, but just that we're all in the room together, and it's really interesting. I don't know how you guys feel about this, but I love working that way, and it's really fun to watch an audience sort of relax into it after, in the first 10 or 15 minutes.
Definitely.
Often in the beginning, you look at people and they look away like, don't pick me. I just came to see a play. I don't want to be in the play. But then by the end, or even, 15 minutes into it, they are completely willing to laugh at the joke with you or be the butt of the joke, or they're much less shy. And our St. Joan and the Hamlet were both like that. The Seagull too, but to less extent, actually. That had sort of the most, but it still didn't have a fourth wall. I've made eye contact with a lot of people during that show personally.
Another thing that I really love about this removal of that fourth wall is that it actually informs our own understanding and interpretation of what the story actually is. And I'll give you an example of that. I mean, for me, personally, I think all of this interaction between actor and audience, maybe implicitly, maybe not, but sort of encourages the audience to respond or to be in it vocally. And so there's a moment during the last scene I have with Eleanor, with Andrus here, between Willoughby and Eleanor, and I love hearing. I love hearing audience reactions to certain points in that scene, and there's one moment where my character says, if I'm ever single again, I'd like to revisit this relationship, perhaps a last ditch effort, and it's really pathetic. And I love hearing this. Oh God, are you serious?
Oh, Jesus.
And I just, that may happen in a more traditional staging. I don't know for sure, but I suspect that part of that is because Bedlam, this particular production, is encouraging such direct feedback, such direct communication, and that really informs and feeds my own enjoyment of it and my own understanding of it. So I think that's a real gift.
Do you have a favorite part of the show? Something that you look forward to every night without fail? No spoilers, or try.
Whoa, what's yours, Laura?
Robert Ferrers. It's a part of the show, and that it's because it's a part of the show that's a little different each. There's actually a line that's different every night, depending on
How Jason is feeling that, how dirty Jason is feeling that day.
how scatological Jason might be feeling that day, but it's just exciting for me as an actor. Jason, all of us, I think, are quite good at working on the fly, but Jason in particular is amazing at improvising and taking what's put in front of him in the moment and using it. So, and it's kind of a moment where I'm on stage, but I can also just sit back and watch what he's doing. So it's just a delight.
I think one of my favorite moments, because it's so indicative of their relationship, is Marianne, who's like a walking exposed nerve, has just been broken up with by the caddish Willoughby, and she's at a dinner party with Eleanor, and Fanny, who's played by Laura, says something mean about Eleanor, and Marianne, thinking she's defending Eleanor, like basically has a huge tantrum and screams at Fanny, and Eleanor scoots her out forcibly, and Andrus generally sits on me and like tries to stop.
She's actually very difficult to get off the stage.
Like, sits on me and like wheels me out while I'm screaming at her, and that while I'm screaming at Laura. And there's something I love so much about like the fact that Marianne really feels like she's really helping you in that moment, but she's just humiliating you, and also that you're trying so hard to shut her up, but it's impossible because I'm basically like, I make it sound like a balloon about to pop, like, yeah. But there's something I love about that because it's so, their relationship is like one of them they just like, their wires cross all the time, but they really have the best intentions towards each other. That's one of my favorite parts.
What about you, John?
Boy, there are so many. Well, there's so many funny ones. There's so many poignant. I think my new favorite moment, I'll say this, is and this is something that's new in this version that we're doing this year, is how much time you take to finally make sure that this is really happening with when at the very end when Edward says, "Will you be mine?" I love how Eric
spoiler alert,
really elongated that and just drew that out, and because there's so much happening there, and it's just so beautiful, and it's a really earned moment. But I love how you and he kind of decided to let that breathe a little more, because it adds a wonderful element of danger there. You don't quite know if it's gonna go there, but that's my favorite moment now, and it's a testament to the show that I have a new favorite moment every week.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I feel the same way about it. I have a new favorite moment every week.
What's your favorite moment this week?
This week?
We're only 2 days in, but
I'm discovering all of Eleanor's interactions with the servants throughout the play. I'm serious, and I'm gotten really interested in the kind of relationship she has with the domestic help. It's very loving. We have I have all these great moments with random servants, and that's the part that I've been enjoying playing the most, actually, in the last today and yesterday.
All right.
It's new for me.
There are a lot of diehard Jane Austen fans out there in the world. Is there anything you've done to lure in folks who might consider this sort of classical literature to be too dry to sit through and watch? I mean, it's spiced up with comedy, certainly, but have you done specific sort of outreach or anything to to drum up the extras.
I think the Jane Austenites have done that for us by dragging their boyfriends and husbands to the show, who often end up loving it despite themselves.
Yeah.
So that's been really nice to see.
And we have a lot of kids coming to see it too, which
Oh,
has
what
been really,
fun.
really
Really fun.
fun.
That's terrific.
I will say, people say this is Jane Austen for people who don't like Jane Austen, and I sort of object to that because I love Jane Austen, obviously, but I think it appeals pretty broadly. There's certainly something for anyone, unless you only like things about robots. Then you're not gonna like it. Then pretend
Spoiler,
we're all
no
robots.
Pretend we're all robots. That's great. I also want to talk a little bit about the role of gender in this production. It's easy to paint with broad strokes and say that Jane Austen's material is sort of outdated and that, the gender roles, Kate has a lot to say.
I'm really excited.
Just launch, just go.
I mean, as I said, I am a huge feminist, which I think is a natural thing to be. So even though neither Eleanor nor Marianne are feminists, that would be something I would be putting on them in a way that I would find objectionable. There are certainly feminist themes within this piece. Marianne, for instance, I quite consciously built in a motif or whatever, that she's sexually shamed because she goes off with Willoughby alone and we don't know what happens, and so when she's dumped by him, everyone says she deserves it. Who knows what she did off with him? And I think that's still very much enforced today. I find the ways in which Eleanor suffers for being the good girl and paying and obeying all the rules are still very much enforced today. And the gender and the rules, the societal rules, also oppress the men in this piece, to be honest. Willoughby flouts the rules and he ends up having to basically sell himself to stop himself from going to prison. Edward obeys all the rules, won't give up his engagement to a girl he's previously been engaged to, even though he's no longer in love with her, because that's the honorable thing to do, and he very nearly gets trapped in a loveless marriage. So for me, gender is a big, big part of this, especially since I find it extraordinarily frustrating when people are judgmental about, for instance, Jane Austen's work or any work about women before a certain time, because the trope is, oh, well, these women are all obsessed with being married. They're obsessed with being married because that's literally their fortune in the world. So to sit in a place of modern judgment about that, I find really, really frustrating. So that's certainly, I certainly constructed the play in a way so you can feel, or tried to, so you can feel their concerns. Eleanor very practically says money is an issue in marriage, and Marianne sort of doesn't want to believe that, but it does affect their prospects so much. So for me, gender's a huge part of this, and honestly, I find it really frustrating when contemporary playwrights, I would say this play passes the Bechdel test. It absolutely passes the Bechdel test, and it's based on a novel written in 1811.
Yeah.
So, and it's full of interesting female parts. So when I see modern plays that don't have interesting female parts, obviously not every play has to be about women. Not every play has to have interesting female parts. But when there's a dearth of that in the world, I get really angry. So yes, that is some of what I wanted to say about gender. I will also say most adaptations of Jane Austen, stage adaptations, the vast majority are by men. Men have every right to love Jane Austen and to have their own perspective, but I certainly think feminist issues are fairly. I have a unique perspective on them in this work. Sorry, I'm getting really excited.
Can I just add to that?
And my phone dropped.
It feels like a huge luxury as an actor to work on a show, first of all, where there are 6 women and 4 men in the cast. That almost never happens, that there's a majority of women, particularly in a classical piece. But even in contemporary works, there's just a lot more parts out there for the men. So if you're a playwright, think about that. There are a lot of very good unemployed actresses in the world because there aren't parts written for them, and or directors and artistic directors aren't willing to cast gender blind.
Other thoughts on the gender issue? I think it's really, really interesting in this context. I walked away from the show sort of confused about how I felt about the male sort of position and in the context of history. And then I stepped away and I had a really great conversation with a friend about it, and I came away being like, go girls. And that was really, really unique for me and really a nice experience.
The only other thing I want to add about gender is that this stage adaptation, unlike a lot of other adaptations of this novel, including the beautiful Ang Lee film that Emma Thompson adapted, even that film cuts the Willoughby scene that's in the novel, in which he explains his situation and which redeems him and makes you, as we were discussing in a later stage of rehearsal this time, it balances things out, for me, so much in that you understand that the men are actually very much in the same boat, in that he may be totally in love with her, but he has no choice. He cannot marry her.
Gendered rules oppress everyone.
Yes.
Yeah. Also, one quick thing. I realize I'm sounding like a broken record, continuing to say, to answer an earlier question of yours, but earlier you said, how did we decide to do sort of a characterization and make it like a caricature rather than a real, honest-to-goodness portrait, a naturalist? And one thing that just occurred to me is that, I mean, it makes it easy for an actor when you're given a role like Willoughby, which is which is more or less realist, and I can approach it at face value. And then, of course, the other character that I'm playing is John Dashwood, who says things like, you know, you look so terrible right now, Marianne, that you're only ever going to attract a man who's worth $500 or $600 a year. I mean, that is so outlandishly. Of course, you know, and I acknowledge that that's a very real sentiment that was much more prevalent then. But it's just, to modern ears, I think it's so absurd that I almost don't have a choice but to play that kind of in an absurd way. If that makes sense.
I will even say, though, like, all of the caricatures, all of the more extreme characters are grounded in reality. Like I find that fairly realistic. Even Anne Steele, who's crazy, is totally boy crazy. She's obsessed with men, and there are people like that.
Yeah, everybody knows that person.
For me, Lucy Steele, I've said this before, but Lucy Steele, who Laura plays, and Anne Steele, who Sam plays, and Marianne and Eleanor are sort of, in some ways, funhouse versions of each other. They're like extreme versions, but they're all still real people. They're just extreme.
At this point, we're going to open it up to the audience. If anybody has a question, feel free to raise your hand. Let's start with you here.
Oh, I don't get a microphone.
No, sorry. We're hoarding them.
I much enjoyed it today. I was just wondering, you know, is it hard to speak Jane Austen because the language is so rich, but it also has to kind of bounce back and forth, be kind of flirty? Like compared to maybe someone like Shore or Chekhov or Shakespeare?
I think Shaw is harder to speak than Austen, personally. I mean, it isn't once you get the hang of it, but we've all done a lot of classical work and do a lot of Shakespeare and Shaw, and I think I can speak for everybody. We're a group of people who really love language plays. So it's kind of a delight to get to play with language that is as like sticky and thick and elaborate as this. It's pretty fun for us. Yeah.
Great.
It doesn't feel like a toil. It feels like a toy. Good. Yeah.
Point in case. Yes.
Andrus, I'd like to hear about more about Bedlam, how it started, and even more important, how you keep it together. Because there's, at this point of view, you and Erin and the rest, because there's so much out there for talented people. You know, oh, let's start a company. Oh, great, for a show or two, and then, ooh, shiny, and other opportunities.
Yeah.
But you kept it. I'm a fan since Joan. Oh, thank you.
We founded the company we did St. Joan, which was the first thing that we did together as Bedlam in 2012. We began talking about the first conversation that we had and commitment to each other to start the company happened in December 2010. We had worked together on a production of a Libertine that I was producing. It was a sort of false start for starting a company for me with another partner. Eric had a couple of false starts starting other companies with other people. We had met at Shakespeare and Company up in Lenox, Massachusetts in 2009. And then worked on the Libertine together and realized that we had similar work ethic, very similar aesthetic. We actually weren't even very good friends. We didn't know each other all that well, but we really liked working together. And it seemed like a really good working relationship, and it was the kind of, it's like a marriage if you're going to really do it and try to launch a company and build an institution from two people sketching out ideas for what seasons you might do on a bar napkin, and to grow that into an actual organization. It's not easy. We did St. Joan, which Eric had directed before. He knew he wanted to do it with 4 people. He knew which the other men he wanted to use. We also hadn't been done in New York in 20 years, if you can believe it. But usually that play has, 27 roles in it, and it's usually a giant pageant with tapestries and a lot of pomp and circumstance, and the language gets lost. And we did an uncut Joan that still ran about 3 hours and 12 minutes, but was lightning speed, if any of you saw it. It was really fast, and the language was the whole point of us being there in the room. The play was really is the star of that production. It's incredible. And we got, honestly, in part, we got really lucky because that production got picked up by the Olney Theater Center, and then we got bigger and bigger reviewers coming in. And I think there are probably a lot of other talented people coming together to make a company. But if you don't do it at the right moment, there is a certain amount of luck to it. We've gotten really lucky with some big critics in this city getting behind us and being willing to say really, really flattering things about us that help us then sell out runs, which then give us the funds to do the next play. So there's a certain amount of luck. Also, we've grown exponentially since 2012. It literally was just Eric and I at that point who were both in St. Joan, in addition to running box office with the help of Sam Steinmetz and a couple of other people who would show up from time to time. But on the way to the theater, I'd be at the wine shop trying to pick up a case of wine to bring for the concession stand, and get that up there before going in the back to jump into costume to go and dealing with patrons and we did everything. And then we we got our non-for-profit status. We put together a board. We now have general managers. We have a literary manager. We have somebody who handles our social media. We're growing. Our staff is growing. We have an outreach program run by Stefan Wolfert, who's in this show, who plays the horse, among many other things, but most memorably. No, the horse is also one of my favorite moments in the play. And he runs a weekly acting class for veterans, military veterans, and which is incredible. And he's a vet himself, and it's really his passion. And so we've just kind of kept going and tried to ride the line between not biting off more than we could chew and really pushing ourselves to do the hardest thing possible every year. Without scheduling too much. I mean, we're sitting here looking at next year and trying to figure out what we're going to do, and we're being very careful to make sure that we take more time to rehearse plays than other companies do. We just do, and I especially when you're working on Shakespeare or Shaw, it shows when you do it, when 4 people are playing 27 roles in St. Joan, and in every single moment, everybody on that stage understands what the argument is and what the position is, and is passionate about those arguments, and it's not dusty. And so you have to have 8 weeks to work on that play, and on most contracts you only get 4. So building and raising extra funds to have more time just to spend around the table with the plays and to spend in a rehearsal hall is really important to us. I think this year we're just gonna make sure that we have enough time before we bring out the next things. It's always a challenge to hold it together because things get really busy, especially when you have, right now we also have Dead Dog Park running at 59th, 59th. So Eric was literally doing double duty when we were in rehearsals for this. The second half of rehearsals, he was rehearsing us during the day and then going up and rehearsing Dead Dog Park at night, or vice versa. And we're all trying to, also just keep the company going and keep the friendship strong and everything else when it gets stressful. It's not easy, but I think it's something that both Eric and I wanted to do, specifically the two of us, for long before we met each other. So I think when we found the person that we knew was going to be able to facilitate success in it, there was the right pairing. You just kind of have to, when it gets hard, figure it out and put your head down and not walk away from it, and trust that the fact that you are really proud of the work you're doing ultimately at the end of the day is it's going to make it all worth it. And then things come back around, and then everything feels easy for a few months, and then it gets really hard again. But yeah, takes ongoing maintenance.
We have time for 2 or 3 more questions, sir.
I was glad to hear that by the time you were done, all of you refer to your relationship with each other, because I think for a show like this, that's so important, that you love each other and you have fun together doing the show. Makes it work for us. But there was one relationship that you didn't say much about, but you said, I love Jane Austen. And I think it's a shame you weren't able to get her to But after all the work that you did with her, what do you think she thinks of you? Does she
I feel a very special bond with Jane Austen, to be honest. I hope she approves. I always like to... I once saw, I won't say who it was, a very famous playwright who had adapted another writer's work say essentially like, well, but my play is completely different, and it's so different that I basically discrediting that person. And I just think that's the way to get haunted by a ghost. But I also, like, if I were dead, I would come back from the afterlife to haunt someone who said that. But also, I feel like Jane Austen was such an incredible genius, and also writing these novels at a time, she would write them on little scraps of paper and hide them when someone came in the room and pretend to be sewing. I mean, and such a genius and so ahead of her time. And when she's dismissed as chick literature, I think that's just because she's a woman. She's so incisive, she's so funny, her social commentary is so on point, and so I hope she approves of me. I'm just wrote a Pride and Prejudice, and I'm planning to write all of adaptations of all of her novels in the order she did to try to learn from that. But I hope she approves of me. I certainly worship her. I keep a little picture of her on the dressing room table. I always say something to her beforehand. I mean, she was a genius. So that's why I like to say it's a collaboration between us. She certainly, she deserves all the credit she gets, more than the credit she gets.
Do you have a question?
Yes. So first of all, wonderful, amazing play, so fabulous. I'm sort of interested in your playwriting, and sort of you mentioned 9 other plays and other plays that you've written. Are they similar to this in sort of the innovative way, and particularly looking at Pride and Prejudice, because I'm really interested in that.
I mean, I think in some ways I'm not the person to ask for perspective on my own plays, because how would I know? I certainly have different ideas about every play and approaches to every play. For me, Pride and Prejudice is a much smaller story. It's more of a... I don't know if I want to go into exactly what I think the theme of Pride and Prejudice is yet, because it's a relatively new script. But for me, it's much more a private story, whereas Sense and Sensibility is a social story. And my other plays, I mean, every play is different. Again, like, each play sort of teaches you what it is. So for me, every play is different, and I can say what I think the similarities between my play are, but again, I don't know that they all tend to have interesting female characters. They all tend to have, like, absurdist humor. They all tend to deal with classism in some way. But again, I don't know that I'm the person to ask for perspective on my own plays, because they're like my children. It's like if you would ask me if my children were cute, probably I would say, yes, they're all cute. Like, I'm the most biased person.
You're proud of them, but you're prejudiced.
Yes, exactly. Nicely played, yes.
Do we have any other questions? Yes, in the back here.
What did you guys actually do during your week-long workshopping of the piece? Like, were you just sitting around the table and just reading off the script? Were you guys on your feet and maybe working on some of the characters?
My stepfather graciously let me bring 9 actors to his house for a week.
Wow.
So we worked more or less around the clock. And
around a table.
Around
mostly.
a table. Actually, it was mostly around a table.
Yeah, the
we moved
very
around a little
last
bit.
day we
but
jumped around.
there was still, I'm not exaggerating, 35 pages to trim at that point. She'd already gotten rid of close to 50 pages from the earliest readings. There was still 35 to go. So a lot of it was just figuring out what was going to be, what was the script and the route through the story that we were going to be left with to play. So we were still very much in, but we needed 9 minds and 7 days and nights around a table, I think, to figure that out and come up with something that didn't feel like there were pieces missing.
Cut.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was a lot of cutting and refining.
Yes?
Is this your permanent home now, the theater you're in?
No, we do not have a permanent home yet. You can help us get a permanent home. We're working on it. We will be working on that more aggressively. Yes. And then in the spring we were up in Midtown.
City or
We take what we find a space that is both available, but that also seems like the right fit for the pieces we want to do. I mean, we're very specific about what we choose, and that has more to do with the actual feeling of the space and the layout of the space than the reputation of the space necessarily. But we're looking for a permanent home.
Time for one more question. Yes, sir.
Yeah, we can see Eric on stage here.
Oh, I'm sure. Yeah. Oh, yes, definitely. We haven't decided yet what we're doing next year, but he will be in those shows. And he was in, did you guys see the 12th Nights in the spring? Yes. Those are going to Boston. So he's going back with those are going to Boston. And then St. Joan with a different batch of actors is going to Houston, Texas. And I'm not sure exactly what we're going to be doing in the fall. There's lots of kind of interesting, exciting ideas floating around, but he will be in those.
All right, everybody, let's give them a round of applause. Last one. Thank you all so very much.